Hello, good evening, and welcome to Mysteries Tea. Tonight we step into a house built to keep its weather out and its secrets in. Behind its old stone walls, kindness has been mistaken for weakness, silence for loyalty, and love for something that could be arranged like furniture. Before dawn comes to Ashcroft Manor, one man will be dead. One family will begin to fracture in earnest, and a truth buried for years will rise, patient and unforgiving from the dust. Today's mystery is Shadows over Ashcroft Manor, a Hercule Poirot Mystery. Chapter 1. Rain had begun before dusk and, by 7 o'clock, had taken possession of the Sussex Downs with the authority of an old grievance. When Hercule Poirot's motor car turned between the stone gateposts of Ashcroft Manor, the yews along the drive stood black and heavy with water, and the lamps in the house shone through the wet like lights seen beneath deep water. The manor itself was long, gray, and self-important, its battlement roof lines softened only by ivy and the steady ruinous work of time. One looked at it and thought not of comfort, but of continuity. Houses like Ashcroft are built by men who believe inheritance to be a form of virtue. The butler received Poirot in the great hall with that professional composure which can conceal anything except prolonged unhappiness. "Mercer," said Poirot, handing over hat and gloves, "you have the air of a man who would prefer that the evening had not begun." Mercer's expression altered by less than an eyelash. "Sir Julian dislikes disorder, monsieur. The storm has caused some inconvenience." "Then it is fortunate," said Poirot, looking up at 3 clocks, striking 3 different versions of the hour, "that disorder arrived before I did." The great hall was paneled in oak darkened nearly to black. Portraits watched from the walls with hereditary indifference. At the far end a young woman had risen from a carved settle as he entered. She wore a plain dark blue dress, and her face was so composed that one noticed only after a second glance how much effort the composure cost her. There was nothing theatrical in her beauty. It was the sort that seemed always on the edge of apology. Before Mercer could speak, a thin bell rang somewhere overhead. Not the brisk bell of service, but a frail old sound, distant and uncertain, as if drawn unwillingly from another decade. The young woman looked up sharply. Mercer went pale. "That bell," she said, almost to herself, "has not rung in years." Poirot bowed. "Then it chooses an excellent night to resume conversation. Mademoiselle, I am Clara Fenwick." She seemed to recover herself. "Sir Julian's ward. Forgive me. It came from the East Wing." "The East Wing is occupied?" "No." Her eyes flicked toward the staircase and away again. "Not now." A man in his middle 30s came striding in from the library with the abrupt energy of one whose patience had worn thin years before. He was handsome in a fair, hard-featured way, with rain-darkened hair and a mouth much too accustomed to bitterness. "Mercer, if the maids have started that nonsense again." He stopped when he saw Poirot. "Ah, the famous Monsieur Poirot. I hope not famous for making an entrance beneath a haunted ceiling." A short laugh escaped him. "No, that honor belongs to the house." "This is Mr. Daniel Ashcroft," said Mercer. Daniel gave a brief nod. "My uncle enjoys interesting company, provided it belongs to other people's difficulties." A low, amused voice came from the drawing-room doorway. "Then tonight he has excelled himself." Lady Helena Ashcroft entered with one hand resting lightly against the frame, as if the house existed chiefly to provide her with backgrounds. She was much younger than Sir Julian, dark-haired, elegantly dressed in black, with a rope of pearls at her throat and an expression of cultivated indifference that did not deceive Poirot for a moment. At the edge of that indifference there was intelligence, and behind it fatigue. "So you arrive in a storm and under a ghostly bell," she said. "Ashcroft Manor means to be memorable. It has already succeeded, madam." She held out her hand. When Poirot bowed over it, he caught the faint scent of dry lavender. Dinner was announced half an hour later. Sir Julian Ashcroft kept them waiting. The dining room was large enough to make conversation feel supervised. Candles burned in silver branches. Rain hissed at the windows, and along the center of the polished table the glass and plate gleamed like disciplined troops. Daniel took his place without enthusiasm. Clara sat halfway down on Helena's side. Adrian Keppel, the family solicitor, was spare, dark, courteous, and smooth in the manner of a man who had polished even his moral deficiencies. Dr. Matthew Vale, local physician, sat opposite Clara with an expression of grave self-command that might have belonged equally to discretion or unease. Sir Julian appeared only after the soup had been served. He was over 60 but powerfully built still, silver-haired, clean-shaven, and meticulously dressed. His face had the force of a man who had spent years being obeyed and had long since mistaken obedience for esteem. His pale eyes traveled around the table as though even in apology he were taking attendance. "My apologies," he said. "The house has lately developed a taste for interruption." "The bell from the East Wing?" asked Helena lightly. Sir Julian's gaze sharpened. "An old defect. Mercer will see to it." He sat. Poirot noticed at once that Sir Julian ate almost nothing. He drank claret, twice looked toward Clara with an intensity that had nothing paternal in it, and once answered Daniel in a tone so coldly correct that insult had been refined into etiquette. Mercer bent to him during the fish course and murmured something. Sir Julian extended one hand without lifting his head. A folded note was placed in it. He read it, and the change in his face was immediate. Not alarm exactly. Alarm is often clean. This was something muddier and much more interesting. Fear mixed with rage. "Bad news?" Helena asked. Sir Julian folded the paper. "An impertinence." "From business?" said Keppel. "From insolence." He rose before anyone could speak again. "Continue without me. No one is to follow." He left by the side door instead of the main one. The latch closed softly behind him. The silence at table lasted several beats, too long. Daniel let out a laugh without amusement. "There's a family genius for turning every meal into a minor inquest." "Your timing is always unfortunate," said Helena. "My opportunities are limited." Keppel raised a placating hand. This weather phrase, everyone. Dr. Vale, who had scarcely spoken all evening, said quietly, "That is an explanation. It is not the same as an excuse." Clara put down her fork. Her hand had begun to tremble, though very slightly. Poirot noticed that too. The second disturbance came 20 minutes later. The electric light dimmed. One candle guttered out. Somewhere above them footsteps ran quickly along a corridor. Mercer's head jerked up. "No one is in the east rooms," he said too fast. Then a cry sounded. It was not loud. The storm nearly swallowed it. But it was the unmistakable cry of a woman surprised beyond restraint. Claire was on her feet at once. That came from the east landing. She reached the door before Mercer could stop her. Poirot rose. Daniel followed with such speed that his chair fell backward. Vale came after them. Keppel hesitated, then joined the others, while Helena moved last of all, lifting the dark silk of her gown clear of the carpet. The east corridor was dimly lit and full of draughts. Halfway down stood a maid with a tray overturned at her feet and one hand clasped over her mouth. "I saw her, sir," she gasped at Mercer. "By the blue room door. I thought at first it was Miss Rose from the portrait gallery, only alive." "Nonsense," Mercer snapped. "A woman in white," whispered the girl. She went into the room, and then the bell sounded. At the end of the passage, a door stood ajar. "The blue room?" Poirot asked. Clara nodded. "It used to be Lady Eleanor's room, Sir Julian's first wife. And now, no one sleeps there." Daniel pushed the door wider. Lightning flashed across the windows, revealing a chamber covered in dust sheets. Furniture loomed beneath linen like hunched figures. The air smelled of cedar, old paper, and a sweetness so faint it was almost imagined. In the center of the room stood a small occasional table. Upon it rested a silver handbell. Its handle was still quivering. "No ghost did that," said Daniel. "No," said Poirot softly. "A ghost has seldom such practical wrists." He crossed the room. Dust on the carpet had been disturbed, though not by broad boot soles. There was a delicate brush trail, as if a long hem had passed that way. Beside the bell lay a burnt match. On the mantel, a framed photograph stood slightly crooked, as though replaced in haste. Poirot set it straight. It showed a fair-haired woman seated beside the very fireplace now before him. Her expression was grave and gentle. One side of the photograph had been neatly cut away. Someone who had once stood beside her had been deliberately removed. "Lady Eleanor?" he asked. Clara's answer came very low. "Yes." "And the missing figure?" No one replied. Mercer said stiffly, "Sir Julian did not care for old things being handled." "A pity," said Poirot. "Old things have excellent memories." The room yielded nothing else. No intruder, no open hiding place, no reason except the obvious one. Whoever had rung the bell wished the household to come here. Mercer was sent to fetch Sir Julian from his study. He returned in less than 2 minutes and was gray under the skin. "The study door is open," he said. "His lamp is lit. The window to the terrace stands wide, and—" He swallowed. "There is blood on the rug." They entered almost together, yet later Poirot would remember the order in which each person saw the body. Clara halted at the threshold. Vale crossed the room first, Daniel just behind him. Helena remained very still beside the door. Keppel stared as though the dead might become an inconvenience if looked at hard enough. Sir Julian Ashcroft lay near the desk, one arm beneath him, the other flung toward the hearth. The wound was small, dark, and ruinously precise. Blood had spread under him in a measured fan. The French window stood open upon the rain-soaked terrace. An ormolu clock on the mantel had stopped at 17 minutes past 9. Vale knelt, touched the throat, listened briefly, then stood. "He is dead." Daniel let out a savage oath. Clara made no sound at all. Helena closed her eyes once and opened them again, restored already to control. Poirot's gaze traveled first not to the wound but to the dead man's shoes. They were immaculate. Outside, beyond the open window, the terrace shone black with rain. Then Poirot bent and saw, caught lightly against the left cuff of Sir Julian's evening shirt, a fine dusting of lavender. Chapter 2. Inspector Lionel Graves arrived shortly before 11 o'clock, broad-shouldered, rain-spattered, and predisposed against any murder that seemed likely to develop personality. He was a competent officer and knew it, which made him patient with facts and impatient with almost everything else. "I'm obliged for your presence, Monsieur Poirot," he said when the formalities had been observed and Sir Julian's body left under guard in the study. though I do not yet see why this should be anything more than a plain case within a house full of motives." Poirot folded his hands on the head of his cane. "My dear Inspector, there is no such thing as a plain case. There are only cases in which people tell dull lies and cases in which they tell interesting ones." They gathered in the drawing room. The fire was high. Shadows moved upon the ceiling. Everyone looked tired, but they did not all look tired in the same way. Helena seemed less widowed than exasperated. Daniel held a glass he did not drink from. Clara sat very upright, her hands locked together. Vale stood apart from the others with the self-containment of a man who does not trust his own voice. Keppel's politeness had sharpened into vigilance. Mrs. Beatrice Lorne, the housekeeper, had been summoned and now stood near the door in severe black, her iron-gray hair immaculate, her expression that of one who has been disappointed too often to waste surprise. Graves began with routine and found at once that routine did not suit the room. "When was Sir Julian last seen alive?" "At dinner," said Daniel. "We have been over that already." "He received a note," said Poirot. "Yes." Graves glanced at his notebook. "The note is missing." "Because somebody removed it," said Helena. "Do you know who?" "No. I have the social gift of observing what people avoid." Daniel let out a dry sound. "Helena observes everything except responsibility." "And you accept everything except blame," she returned. Graves cut them off. Clara had seen Sir Julian only at table. She did not know what message had summoned him. Keppel admitted Sir Julian had lately been preoccupied with legal arrangements concerning the estate. Daniel admitted debts, admitted quarrels with his uncle, admitted even that he had wished at moments to strike him. He did not admit murder. "If every angry word spoken in this house were evidence," he said, "you'd need a clerk by dawn." Helena answered questions about her marriage with chilling clarity. "If you wish me to pretend we were devoted, Inspector, you will waste both our time. My husband liked possession more than companionship." "Where were you after dinner?" "In the drawing room. Later in my room with a headache. My maid brought sal volatile." "Did you enter the east wing?" "No." Poirot, watching her, thought that she lied beautifully, but not, perhaps, on the most important point. Dr. Vale described the wound as the work of a thin blade driven upward with force and skill or great determination. He admitted, after a pause too brief to be clumsy and too long to be innocent, that he had left the drawing room for a few minutes after Sir Julian departed dinner. "To do what?" asked Graves. "To fetch my medical case from the hall. I had planned to leave early." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No." Graves wrote that down with visible satisfaction. Adrian Keppel gave the sort of answers that are technically complete and morally useless. He had remained in the drawing room, heard nothing unusual until the cry in the East Passage, and knew nothing of the note. Sir Julian had indeed discussed changes to his will, but professional confidence prevented elaboration. "There's authority enough now," Daniel said sharply. "Not until probate requires it." "Even death," said Daniel, "must wait for your paperwork." When Graves turned to Mrs. Lorne, Poirot leaned slightly forward. Servants are often questioned as though they contain less mystery than their employers. He had never shared the prejudice. "You heard the bell in the east wing?" Graves asked. "Yes." "Who would know how to ring it?" "Anyone long enough in the house." "Name them." "Sir Julian, Mr. Daniel, Lady Helena, Miss Fenwick, Mercer, myself, Mr. Keppel, perhaps, if habit counts for residence." Keppel's smile thinned. "You honor me." Graves ignored him. "Did Sir Julian visit Lady Eleanor's room?" "Not willingly," said Beatrice. The phrase hung in the air. What does that mean? It means only what it says. Graves made an irritated mark in his notebook. Poirot spoke gently. Mrs. Lorne, when were those rooms last aired? Not for some time. And yet there is still lavender in the blue room. Beatrice's eyes shifted to him. Old linen keeps scents. And the dead man's cuff kept some too. It was the first perfect silence since the murder. Helena turned her head. Daniel looked from Poirot to Beatrice. Clara's fingers tightened until the knuckles whitened. Vale's expression altered almost imperceptibly. Helena said at last, I use lavender. So, I believe, did Lady Eleanor. Exactly, said Poirot, which makes it very useful to anyone wishing to suggest a woman, the past, or both. Graves Whodunit. You think the open window and stop clock were arranged? Poirot inclined his head. Sir Julian's shoes are dry. The terrace is drenched. Therefore the open window is not a route but a message. And the clock stopped at too neat a moment. Murderers who attempt poetry usually leave fingerprints upon a meter. Clara lifted her eyes. Then he was called first to the blue room? Very likely. Why? Poirot looked at the fire. Because there was something there that still had power over him. Graves resumed his questioning, but the shape of the evening had already altered. Daniel's debts became more significant. Vale's attachment to Clara emerged, then Sir Julian's strong opposition to it. Under pressure, Clara admitted that Sir Julian had lately spoken of arranging something for her future. Keppel called it a settlement. Daniel called it a sale. Helena said nothing, but the faintest contempt touched her mouth. At midnight, the formal statements ended. Graves posted a constable at the study and another in the East Passage. Nobody was to leave the house. Mercer withdrew. Helena vanished with the self-possession of a woman who considered sleep a private form of revenge. Daniel went to the billiard room. Vale remained standing at the fireplace, as if he had forgotten how to sit. Clara paused near Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly. When a maid cried out, I had the strangest feeling that whoever went into the blue room did not mean to frighten us. No, I felt they meant us to see it, to remember it. Poirot looked pleased. Very good, mademoiselle. Someone wishes the past to be consulted. Then why is Sir Julian dead? Perhaps because he wished the same past buried once and for all. She hesitated. When I was younger, I sometimes heard someone walking in the East Wing at night. Mrs. Lorne said it was the house settling. And did you believe her? I wanted to. She left. Poirot stood alone for a time until Graves returned from another inspection of the study. Well, asked the inspector. Poirot pointed not toward the dead man's room, but up toward the clock above the drawing-room mantel. It was running 7 minutes slow. In Ashcroft Manor, said Poirot, even the innocent clocks tell lies. Chapter 3. Morning gave Ashcroft Manor no absolution. The rain had passed before dawn, leaving the lawn silvered, the yew walk black against a pale sky, and the house itself sharper in the flat morning light. What night conceals, morning often accuses. Poirot breakfasted almost alone. Mercer moved quietly between sideboard and table with the unobtrusive efficiency of a man who had decided that even murder must not interrupt the toast. Clara came in late, looking as though she had not slept at all. Daniel arrived 15 minutes after her, unshaven and grim. Helena did not appear until nearly 9 and wore gray instead of black, as if widowhood would not be permitted the vanity of costume. Keppel followed her with a face trained back into legal usefulness. Dr. Vale had gone with Inspector Graves to confer with the police surgeon. The first new fact came from Mercer. "The note was not brought with the post, sir," he told Graves. "Someone handed it to me from the service turning outside the dining room." "Did you see who?" "No, only a gloved hand." "Man or woman?" "I cannot say." "Color of the glove?" "Gray, perhaps, or beige." It was only an instant. Poirot asked, "And the paper? Did it bear a seal?" Mercer thought, "No seal, but there may have been wax on it. A little roughness near the fold. A candle had touched it." "Yes, monsieur, that is possible." Graves muttered something disapproving about households that handled vital evidence like invitations to supper. The study looked different by daylight and worse. The blood had dried to a dark stiffness on the rug. The open window admitted a chill draft that made the curtains breathe in and out. Poirot stood in the middle of the room without moving for nearly a minute. Graves watched him with professional impatience. "Well, my friend, the room is too eager. You said that last night, and it has had all night to improve. Yet still it overacts." He went first to the desk. The correspondence there had been disturbed less than grief would disturb it. A crystal paperweight held down several legal papers. One was half withdrawn from the rest, then replaced. Poirot lifted the weight carefully. It was a draft codicil to Sir Julian's will. Daniel's inheritance was reduced to an annuity. Clara Fenwick was to receive a large outright settlement upon marriage, or at Sir Julian's discretion if unmarried. Lady Helena's provision was unchanged. Several charities benefited, which Poirot always regarded as the final cosmetic of a bad conscience. The document was unsigned. "Incomplete," said Graves. "Yes, but enough to irritate a family." Graves sent immediately for Keppel, who admitted that he had drawn up the draft at Sir Julian's request the previous afternoon. "Was Miss Fenwick's marriage under discussion?" Poirot asked. Keppel clasped his hands with faint annoyance. Sir Julian wished her future secured. "By whom?" "By suitable alliance." "That is not a name." Keppel looked at Clara, then away. Several possibilities were considered. Daniel gave a short, ugly laugh. "How delicately he sells it." Clara's color rose. There was no agreement. "There was to be," said Daniel, "if our dear uncle had his way." Keppel's voice hardened. "This is neither the time nor the forum." "No," said Poirot. "For truth, perhaps not. That often arrives later." When Keppel had gone, Poirot examined the mantel clock. Behind its brass rim, half hidden near the winding keyhole, was a bead of pale wax. "Stop by candle," said Graves. Deliberately. At 17 minutes past 9, an admirably dramatic hour, from the grate Poirot lifted, with tweezers, a blackened scrap of paper overlooked in the night. Under the lens one line remained partly legible. "Will not let Clara be sold like." And below it, the tail of a signature. "Rice." "Beatrice," said Graves instantly, or a name intended to suggest Beatrice. The inspector's eyes narrowed. "You distrust everything." "No, only what arrives too obligingly." Mrs. Lorne was brought in. She read the fragment without any visible start. "Did you write this?" asked Graves. "No." "Did Sir Julian mean to force Miss Fenwick into marriage?" Beatrice lifted her head. "Sir Julian meant many things. He generally mistook intention for right." "That is not an answer." "It is the only one I choose to give." Clara, who had come in behind Mercer, spoke suddenly. "He wished me to marry Mr. Keppel." No one in the room moved. Keppel had re-entered at the last words and now stood quite still in the doorway, his face gone white under its healthy polish. "That is absurd," he said. "No," said Clara. "It is merely unwelcome." Helena, from the window, let out a breath that sounded like laughter stripped of amusement. "At last," she murmured. "One person in this house speaks plainly." Graves turned sharply. Was such a marriage contemplated? Keppel answered before anyone else could. Sir Julian made suggestions. I did not encourage them. Daniel looked at him with open disgust. You merely hovered within reach of them. Poirot watched Clara. Her control was excellent, but shame and anger had laid hold of it together. "And Dr. Vale?" he asked softly. She met his eyes. "Dr. Vale asked me to marry him. I accepted." Keppel made an involuntary movement. Helena straightened. Daniel swore under his breath, not in disapproval, but in revelation. When Vale returned and heard that this had been said openly, he did not deny it. "Sir Julian forbade it," he said. "Did you obey?" asked Graves. "No." "Did you quarrel with him?" "Yes." "How recently?" "2 nights ago. In the library." "Violently?" "Only in words. Men have been murdered for less," Vale said with sudden bitterness, "and women have had their lives arranged for less." That answer lingered. Later that morning, Poirot asked for the keys to the East Wing. Mercer produced a ring from his pocket, then hesitated. "One key is missing, monsieur." "The blue room cupboard?" Mercer looked startled. "Yes." "And what does the cupboard contain?" "Lady Eleanor's effects. Papers. Small personal things. Sir Julian kept meaning to have them sorted, meaning to forget them tidily." Mercer lowered his eyes. "Yesterday afternoon, sir, he instructed me that the east rooms were to be aired today." "For occupation?" "No mercer squalud." "For removal. He said certain old things were to be burned." At that Clara turned from the window, so sharply her chair scraped the floor. If he meant to destroy her belongings, she said, what was he afraid she had left behind? No one answered. In the blue room, daylight revealed more than lightning had. The wallpaper, once a soft French blue, had faded to the color of cold milk. Dust lay thick on the dressing table, except where a recent hand had cleared a space near the mirror. The portrait that had been turned inward now showed Lady Eleanor standing in the garden with a closed parasol, her expression grave and inward. The air still carried its faint sweetness. Poirot went first to the cupboard. The outer door opened. Inside were shelves of boxes, hat cartons, bundles of letters tied with ribbon. Yet the lock of the inner compartment stood empty and scratched. Someone had opened it without the missing key. On the floor beneath lay a splinter of painted wood. "Forced," said Graves. "Not last night," said Poirot, touching the dry edge. "Earlier." Inside the inner compartment there remained only one object, a small prayer book in white leather, its clasp broken. Clara took a step closer. That was Lady Eleanor's. She used to keep violets inside it. Poirot opened the book. Between the Psalms and the Gospel of St. John lay a tiny photograph, no larger than a calling card. It showed a nursemaid or young servant standing beside a perambulator in the south garden. The woman's face was half shadowed by a hat. Written on the back in faded ink were the words, "For Edot, so that she may never be lonely again. No signature." Daniel looked over Poirot's shoulder. "A child." "The pram is covered," said Poirot. "The child is concealed." "How characteristic." "Graves froneth." "What has this to do with murder?" Poirot slipped the photograph into an envelope. "That remains to be seen." As they turned to leave the room, his eye fell upon the fireplace tiles. A faint crescent mark scored the glaze near the hearthstone, as though a metal-tipped cane or walking stick had struck there repeatedly in agitation. Sir Julian used no cane. Keppel did. So, occasionally, Beatrice on the stairs. Poirot said nothing. The first arrest of feeling, if not of the law, occurred that afternoon. A maid cleaning the billiard room found beneath a leather armchair a narrow surgical knife stained brown at the tip. Graves sent at once for Vale. The doctor examined it and went very still. "It is mine. Missing since when? I had not noticed. How convenient." Vale's face shut hard. "I use such blades in practice, Inspector. That does not make me a murderer." "No," said Graves, "but it assists." Clara rose from her chair, so abruptly it seemed she had forgotten decorum entirely. "This is absurd. Anyone could have put it there." "Anyone," said Graves, "or someone seeking to hide it badly because he had no time to hide it well." Vale did not look at her. "Sit down, Clara." "I will not." Helena's gaze moved from one to the other with a cool sadness. "Now we begin," she said. Poirot picked up the knife with a handkerchief and examined its handle. There were no visible prints. A faint smear of billiard chalk lay near the grip. "Curious," he murmured. Daniel, by the mantel, lifted his head. "What is?" "A medical instrument that has spent time among cue racks." Graves chose not to hear. The discovery gave him a line, and he followed it. By evening, Vale was not arrested, but he was effectively caged. A constable was posted outside his room. Graves had motive, opportunity, a weapon, and a romance respectable enough to make juries sentimental in one direction and savage in another. After dinner, if the subdued meal merited the name, Poirot found Helena alone in the morning room. She sat by the darkened window without a lamp, looking out into the wet garden where the yews had become masses of shadow. "You are not surprised about the knife," said Poirot. "No, because you expected an instrument to appear." She turned her head. "Because in houses like this evidence is always discovered by the person who most needs someone else to be guilty." "Whom do you mean?" "All of us." Poirot stood beside the cold fireplace. Did Sir Julian love Miss Fenwick? Helena's laugh was quiet and merciless. He loved ownership. With some men, the distinction never becomes clear. Yet you stayed with him. For the same reason, many people remain in unhappy houses. Habit, fear, money, and the vulgar inconvenience of scandal. She rose then, and as she passed him, he caught again the dry lavender scent. At the door she stopped. "If you intend to save Clara," she said, "do it quickly. Ashcroft Manor has an appetite for the young." She went out, leaving him with that sentence. An hour later, Mercer brought a message. Inspector Graves wished to see him in the study. On Sir Julian's desk lay a torn scrap found behind the blotter when the lamp had been moved for cleaning. It was part of the missing note that had summoned him from dinner. Only 6 words remained. "Come at once to the Blue Room." And beneath them, in a different hand or in one badly disguised, "She knows." Chapter 4. The note transformed the house from a place of generalized suspicion into one arranged around a definite past. "She," said Graves, tapping the paper, "must refer to Lady Helena, Miss Fenwick, or Mrs. Lorne. Some woman with knowledge of whatever this Blue Room business means." "To one dead woman," said Poirot. Graves gave him a look in which patience and annoyance negotiated. "I prefer the living." "That is because you hope to arrest them." The fragment had been torn, not cut. The paper was good quality, but not from Sir Julian's desk stock. Its edge carried a minute flake of sealing wax. Graves sent the servants to search every wastebasket, grate, and writing table in the house. By midnight, the search produced nothing except a series of mutual offenses. Poirot spent the next morning interviewing the household in private. He began with Daniel. They met in the old smoking room overlooking the yew walk. Daniel had slept badly and looked as though he resented both the night and its result. "You hated your uncle," said Poirot. Daniel shrugged. "Too simple. Hatred implies energy. He exhausted affection first, and yet you remain dependent upon him. That is the family disease." Poirot let silence do its work. Daniel crossed to the mantel and stood with his back to it. He held the estate like a weapon. If I displeased him, I was reminded that Ashcroft would one day be mine only if he chose not to alter his mind before breakfast. "Did he ever strike you?" Daniel looked up sharply. "When I was younger, yes. Not often. Often enough. And Miss Fenwick?" Daniel's mouth hardened. "He never touched her in my sight, if that is what you're asking. But you feared he might?" A pause. "I feared anything that allowed him too much privacy." Poirot studied him. "You are fond of her. Like a sister. Only like a sister?" Daniel's laugh held no amusement. "Do not invent another complication. She is the only person in this house who has ever made me wish to be better than I am." "And Dr. Vale?" "He loves her honestly, which in Ashcroft Manor counts as recklessness." "Where were you between 8:30 and 9? "In the billiard room." "Alone?" "Yes. You understand how inconvenient that is." "I was raised here, Monsieur Poirot. Inconvenience is our native language." From Daniel, he went to Helena. She received him in her sitting room, where 2 trunks stood half-packed, though she could not possibly yet leave. A fire burned low. On a side table stood a silver-backed brush, a bottle of lavender water, and a cut-glass ashtray with 2 cigarette ends, though Helena had not smoked in his presence. "You're preparing to go?" he asked. "I am preparing to stop belonging to this house." "That is not the same thing." She smiled faintly. "Nothing is the same thing here, is it?" Poirot looked at the ashtray. "Someone has been with you." "Of course. My maid, Inspector Graves. Misery. And a man who smokes Turkish tobacco." Her eyes sharpened. "Now you show off." "Not all. Mr. Keppel smokes Turkish cigarettes. Dr. Vale does not. Daniel prefers a pipe when he remembers to finish one." "Which gentleman came to offer sympathy?" "Mr. Keppel came to discuss practical matters. Before probate, men like Mr. Keppel regard death as practical from the first minute." Poirot moved toward the window. "Did Sir Julian intend Clara to marry him?" "Yes." "And did Mr. Keppel desire it?" Helena considered. Desire is too human a word. He considered it useful. "Did Sir Julian know of Clara's understanding with Dr. Vale?" "Yes. It amused him to forbid it." "Why?" Helena's expression altered. "Because Matthew Vale had one quality my husband never forgave in others. Self-respect." Poirot turned. "Madam, on the night of the murder, did you go to the East Wing?" For the first time, she looked almost tired rather than elegant. "Yes." "Ah, I heard the bell before dinner. Not the later one, the first. I went as far as the turning and saw Mrs. Lorne coming out of the blue room." Poirot said nothing. She had a candle in her hand and looked like a woman who had been speaking to the dead. Helena continued. "She told me the draft had upset an old bell wire. I did not believe her, but I was not curious enough to quarrel with ghosts before supper." "And you did not tell the inspector?" "No, because if Beatrice killed Sir Julian, I am not yet sure the law deserves her." That was the first statement at Ashcroft which felt less like evasion than judgment. Poirot found Beatrice in the still room sorting linen lists with an attention so severe that one might have thought domestic order alone stood between England and collapse. "Lady Helena tells me she saw you leaving the blue room before dinner," he said. Beatrice did not look up. "Then Lady Helena has decided to become helpful." Were you there? Yes. Why? To see whether Sir Julian had indeed ordered the place opened. And had he? Yes. Did you force the cupboard? No. Did you remove papers from it? No. Poirot let a little silence stretch. You cared for Lady Eleanor, he said. Now she looked up. Yes. As servant. As much more than this house permitted one to say. There was no embarrassment in it, only age and candor, and an old wound long since admitted into the structure of the self. Poirot inclined his head. And Sir Julian? I served him. That was not my question. No, she said. It never is. When he left her, he understood something new. Beatrice's restraint did not come from timidity. It came from discipline honed against hatred. The day ended with what Inspector Graves believed to be a decisive improvement in the case. A village boy brought word that, on the afternoon before the murder, Daniel Ashcroft had attempted to cash a check in Louis and been refused because his uncle's instruction to the bank had recently changed. Graves obtained confirmation by telephone. Daniel, brought into the study and confronted, admitted it at once. Sir Julian tightened my allowance, he said. Must poverty be theatrical too? It becomes so when it murders, said Graves. Are you charging me? Not yet, but the day is young. Daniel glanced at Poirot. He would arrest the weather if it rained on schedule. Graves ignored him. You quarreled with Sir Julian about money. You were alone during the relevant period. A note directing suspicion to the Blue Room appears in your dressing case. A club IOU proving financial pressure is conveniently found upon your person. Explain why someone should frame you so industriously unless you had already made yourself dangerous. Daniel's face changed. For the first time, anger gave way to something more nearly despair. Because it is easy, he said. Because I am untidy, indebted, angry, and have spent 10 years saying aloud what other people here only think. Afterward, Poirot went up alone to the long gallery. Evening had fallen. The portraits had retreated into shadow. Clara stood by Lady Eleanor's picture, looking down into the garden. Inspector Graves believes he is coming to a conclusion, said Poirot. About Daniel? Yes. He is wrong. Why are you so sure? Clara turned. Because Daniel threatens and storms and says cruel things when he is miserable. But if he had wanted Sir Julian dead, he would not have hidden behind bells and old rooms and little scraps of paper. He would have done something much simpler and much more terrible. Poirot's eyes warmed. An excellent distinction. She hesitated. Monsieur Poirot, do you think Lady Eleanor was unhappy here? He looked toward the portrait. I think she was lonely in a house full of witnesses. Clara lowered her voice. I found something in my room after luncheon. From her sleeve, she drew a folded scrap of notepaper. It contained only a line, written in a cramped, unsteady hand. Ask who Rose was. Chapter 5. Rose was not a name anyone at Ashcroft Manor wished to hear spoken. Poirot proved this by the simple expedient of saying it aloud at breakfast. Who, he asked pleasantly into the shocked quiet around the coffee urn, was Rose? Mercer nearly dropped a spoon. Keppel stared at his plate. Helena's eyelids lifted a fraction. Daniel looked blank for 1 second, then thoughtful. Beatrice went as still as stone. Only Clara seemed more bewildered than afraid. A village girl, said Mercer too quickly. She was once in service here. Once, said Poirot. She left many years ago. Under what circumstances? Mercer's mouth thinned. I do not know, monsieur. Then who does? No one answered. Later that morning, Poirot and Graves drove to the village. Ashcroft was the sort of place that appeared modest and inoffensive while containing several generations of intimate judgment. At the post office, the baker's shop, and finally the rectory, the name Rose produced a pattern of hesitation too exact to be accidental. At last the rector's widowed sister, Miss Penrith, an old woman with a spine like an iron poker and memory preserved in vinegar, supplied what the village had withheld. "Rose March," she said, "pretty as spring and nearly as foolish." She was upstairs maid at the manor when Sir Julian's first wife still lived. Left suddenly. There was talk. There is always talk where a rich man and a pretty servant share a roof. The girl died some months later in Brighton. "So I heard." "Of what?" asked Graves. Miss Penrith's mouth became severe. "Childbirth." Graves sat forward. "A child survived?" "I cannot say. One heard both stories. In villages, truth arrives with apron strings on and changes twice before tea." Poirot thanked her. Outside in the lane, Graves said, with satisfaction too early to be wise, "There we are. Sir Julian compromised a servant years ago. Mrs. Lorne or Miss Fenwick discovers it. Blackmail, scandal, resentment, murder." "Possibly," said Poirot. "But if the child lived, where did it go?" "Graves froneth." "To relatives, most likely. Or nearer than that." They stopped next at the surgery, where Vale's assistant confirmed that the missing knife had vanished from an unlocked instrument roll 3 days earlier, during a crowded evening clinic when several villagers had passed through the dispensary. This relieved Vale less than Graves disliked. "Anyone could have taken it," the inspector admitted. "Exactly. Which means the knife points everywhere and nowhere." When they returned to the manor, Daniel met them in the hall with a look of dangerous impatience. "Keppel is packing," he said. "Packing?" Graves repeated. "In theory, to return to London for papers. In practice, I imagine, to improve his distance from us." Keppel was intercepted in his room, where 2 cases indeed stood open upon the bed. "This is intolerable," he said. "I have business in town." "And a dead client in Sussex," said Graves. "You do not leave." Keppel's temper, so long maintained at parlor temperature, rose at last. "You speak as if I benefit from this. Sir Julian's death complicates every professional matter in which I am involved. Yet a marriage settlement with Miss Fenwick might have simplified others." Keppel flushed darkly. "That suggestion is impertinent." "It is also true," said Helena from the doorway. All turned. She had entered noiselessly and now leaned one shoulder against the frame, looking at Keppel with open disdain. "You wanted Clara because Sir Julian wanted her compliant, and because a grateful husband with access to her money would suit you very well." Keppel stared at her. "You go too far." "No," said Helena. "I merely say aloud what men prefer to call prudence." Clara, pale but steady, had come behind Helena. "I would never have married you." Something naked and ugly flickered across Keppel's face before he controlled it. "My dear Miss Fenwick, no one was asking for romance." "That," said Poirot, "is perhaps the most damning sentence he had spoken in this house." By evening, Graves had shifted his emphasis. Vale remained watched. Daniel remained suspect. But now Keppel too had motive sharpened by humiliation, money, and thwarted convenience. The case grew broader and no clearer. At sunset, Poirot walked alone through the south garden where Lady Eleanor's photograph had been taken. The wet paths smelled of box and earth. At the end of a lime avenue, he found a rusting iron pram half hidden in an old potting shed. He stood looking at it for a long time. When he returned, he went directly to Clara. She was in the schoolroom, a place left curiously intact from her adolescence. Atlases, a cracked globe, shelves of improving novels never improved by having been written. She looked up with the anxious hope of someone who has spent 2 days hearing only the wrong truths. "Mademoiselle," said Poirot, "what is your earliest memory of Ashcroft?" She frowned a little. "A window seat in the nursery. Lady Eleanor reading to me, and Mrs. Lorne unpicking a blue ribbon because I had knotted it hopelessly." "How old were you?" "I don't know. 4 perhaps. And before that, nothing certain." She gave a faint, embarrassed smile. "Childhood seems to begin only where one is first loved." Poirot said gently, "Did you ever see a birth certificate?" She stared. "No. Why should I?" "Because perhaps the house has named you one thing and the truth another." Before she could speak, a crash sounded from the corridor. They ran out. Mercer was on his knees beside the table in the East Passage, where a porcelain vase had shattered across the carpet. The constable stationed there had been struck from behind and now sat dazed against the wall. The blue room door stood open. Inside, drawers had been pulled out, boxes overturned, ribbons torn loose. Somebody had searched the room in violent haste. But only one object seemed to matter. Lady Eleanor's prayer book was gone. Chapter 6. For several minutes after the theft of the prayer book, nobody in the East Passage spoke at all. The injured constable, a young man named Hales, sat with his shoulders against the wall and one hand to the back of his head while Dr. Vale, under guard but still useful, examined him. Mercer hovered near the broken vase as though household objects offended him more than violence. Clara stood in the doorway of the blue room, looking not at the disorder but at the empty space where the book had been. "It was not taken for value," said Poirot quietly. "Obviously not," snapped Graves. "It was taken for what it contained, or for what someone feared it might contain." Hales insisted he had heard only one step behind him before the blow fell. He had glimpsed nothing except a dark sleeve and a hand in a glove. Yet when Poirot stooped near the wall where the constable had slumped, he found on the carpet a small crescent of gray ash. Not pipe ash, not the dense black curl of a cheap cigarette. He touched it, smelled it, and slipped it into an envelope. "Turkish tobacco," he said. Graves looked up sharply. "Keppel," said Daniel at once. "Or somebody who borrows another man's vices," said Poirot. Keppel protested with a controlled indignation so nearly perfect that it irritated even Helena. "I was in my room," he said. "Mercer brought me tea at 4:30. Mercer confirmed it, yet the timing was not complete. Between 4:15 and 4:30, Keppel could not account for himself with certainty. He had been writing letters, he said. One page in his room showed fresh ink, but the page might easily have been begun afterward. "Search his cases," said Graves. They found no prayer book. They did, however, find in Keppel's traveling valise a pair of soft gray gloves damp at one finger, as if recently washed. Keppel answered that he had spilled ink upon them in the morning and rung for hot water. "Did you?" Graves asked Mercer. "Yes, sir." The butler's answer was immediate and unhelpfully sincere. Graves swore, not loudly but feelingly. When the uproar had subsided a little, Poirot asked Clara to walk with him to the nursery corridor. It had been closed for years, but Mercer had the key. Dust lay over the old schoolroom maps and horsehair chairs. In the former nursery, a faded frieze of ships sailed eternally above cracked paint. "You knew this place well?" Poirot asked. Clara nodded. "Until I was sent away. Lady Eleanor used to sit by that window in the afternoons." "And Mrs. Lorne?" "She was always near. Mending, reading, listening. She frightened me a little when I was very young. but only because she seemed to know whenever I was about to do something foolish. That is one of the duties of motherhood, said Poirot. She turned, startled. Motherhood? Poirot did not answer at once. He had crossed to the built-in cupboard by the hearth. The top shelf contained dolls, a wooden Noah's Ark, and a cardboard box of nursery copybooks. In the bottom lay a child's shawl, carefully folded. One corner was worked in blue silk with a single letter, C. On the inside hem, much fainter, almost unpicked away, was another mark, RM. Clara saw it too. What does that mean? It means, said Poirot, that objects are less obedient than people. They keep the first truth under the second. Her face had gone very white. He folded the shawl again and did not yet give it to her. That evening he sent Graves to Lewes for parish registers and birth records. Ashcroft Manor had, over the years, managed its narratives with the same care it managed its silver. Names altered, stories thinned, dependencies were made to sound like benevolence. The parish register showed no birth for any Clara Fenwick in the district. There was, however, an entry for the burial of one Edmund Fenwick, distant cousin to Lady Eleanor, 12 months before Clara first appeared in the household as a child under Lady Eleanor's protection. It was a coincidence too useful to be innocent. Fenwick gave them a name, said Graves. Yes, said Poirot, but not a child. Late that night, Poirot asked Mercer one seemingly trivial question. When Miss Clara was young, who nursed her? Mercer hesitated. Mostly Mrs. Lorne, sir. Lady Eleanor was delicate at times. And before Mrs. Lorne became housekeeper, she had oversight of the women upstairs. Always under that name? Mercer looked troubled. I cannot say. She came before I did, monsieur. That answer, too, was useful. The next morning brought a scene that altered the emotional temperature of the house. Graves, following the obvious line as one follows rails, confronted Vale with the missing prayer book, the stolen knife, and Clara's vulnerability. He meant, perhaps, to break him into admission. Sir Julian stood between you and the woman you wanted, he said. You had access to blades. You had movement in the house. You were being defended too passionately to help yourself. Why not finish it and be done? Vale's restraint snapped, not into confession, but into anger. Because I did not kill him. Then who did? Vale drew a hard breath. Someone who understood what Sir Julian was capable of. Someone who knew this house better than I do. You refer to whom? Vale looked toward Clara, who had come in unnoticed at the last exchange. What he did next was the sort of mistake made only by decent men under pressure. If you must arrest someone, he said, arrest me and spare her. Graves straightened like a man hearing the word he has waited for. Sparing whom? Vale closed his eyes briefly. That is not what I meant. No, it means only that she has suffered enough. Graves heard none of the humanity and all of the danger. By luncheon, Vale was formally placed under arrest on suspicion of murder. Clara did not cry. She stood beside the hall table while the constable took him and said, in a voice so controlled that Daniel turned away from hearing it, Matthew, do not be noble. It never helps with police. Vale managed, even then, a faint smile. No, but I was trying to help with you. When he had gone, Clara remained where she was, one hand on the carved edge of the table, staring at nothing. Helena crossed the hall and, with a gentleness Poirot had not yet seen in her, laid a hand on the girl's shoulder. Come upstairs, she said. Clara shook her head. It is no good asking you to be brave, is it? Helena said softly. You do it automatically. Daniel swore at Graves with such fluency that Mercer intervened for the dignity of the house. Poirot said nothing until the room had emptied. Then he went alone to the blue room once more. The disorder had been partially restored, though no restoration can remove violence from a room. He examined the carpet beneath the dressing table and found what had escaped the intruder, a thin strip of paper torn from the flyleaf of the missing prayer book. 3 words remained in Lady Eleanor's hand. If Clara learns. Nothing more. That night, long after the house had gone still, Poirot sat in the former nursery with the child's shawl on his knees and the scrap of paper beside him. At 11:30, Beatrice Lorne came quietly into the room and shut the door behind her. "You sent for me," she said. "Yes." Poirot touched the folded shawl. "I think, madam, we have reached the hour for truth." Beatrice looked at the shawl, and all the color went out of her face. "Who?" asked Poirot. "Was Rose March?" For a moment she stood without moving. Then she said in a voice changed almost beyond recognition, "I was." Chapter 7. The confession did not come like a flood. It came like something long frozen beginning, at last, to thaw. Beatrice sank into the old nursery chair by the window. In the thin moonlight, with the faded ships moving above her on the frieze, she looked not like a housekeeper, but like the remnant of a life never properly buried. "My name was Rose Beatrice March," she said. No one at the manor ever used both names. When there was trouble, it became convenient that only half of me should survive. Poirot said nothing. He knew the value of a silence, not hostile. "I came to Ashcroft at 19, she went on. "I had a mother dying in Brighton and 2 brothers who drank whatever wages found them. Lady Eleanor was kind from the first day. Sir Julian was attentive. A girl can mistake attention for rescue if she has not been taught the price of it. Her hands, folded in her lap, had begun to tremble. She tightened them until the trembling stopped. When I knew I was carrying his child, he offered money and removal. Lady Eleanor discovered it before he could arrange either. I expected dismissal. Instead, she sent me away quietly to Brighton with a nurse she trusted. She came herself when the baby was born." "Clara," said Poirot. "Yes." For the first time the name broke her voice. "I wanted to keep her. Of course I wanted it. But I had nothing, and Lady Eleanor had just lost her own child a year before. I think something in her had been going dark ever since. She asked me, no, not asked, she pleaded that the baby should be brought into the house and raised as her ward under another name. She said she would protect us both. She said Julian must never be allowed to turn the child into one more instrument of himself. And you agreed. I agreed because I was weak. I agreed because I loved my child and had no roof to give her. I agreed because Lady Eleanor was the only person who had ever looked at my shame and treated it as grief instead." She drew a breath that seemed to hurt. "The village was told I had died in childbirth. A convenient rumor. I came back months later as Beatrice Lorne. It had been my grandmother's name. Lady Eleanor gave me charge over the upstairs maids and later the whole house. No one questions a middle-aged woman's history if she works hard enough and speaks little enough." Poirot looked down at the shawl. "And Clara never knew." "No. Lady Eleanor meant to tell her when she was older. Then she died." "How did Lady Eleanor die?" Beatrice closed her eyes. "Officially? Pneumonia after an autumn chill. In truth, she had been wearing herself away for years. Sir Julian was not kind to opposition. He never struck her. He did not need to. He was a climate. She withered inside it." Poirot said very gently, "And Sir Julian knew Clara's identity?" "Yes. Always. From the beginning. Yet he allowed her to remain in the house. He liked possession. Lady Eleanor made him promise that the child would be maintained and educated. I think he found amusement in keeping what might someday embarrass him, as though scandal were another investment to be managed. Poirot was silent a long moment. Did he know lately that Clara loved Dr. Vale? Yes, and he opposed it because Vale could take her away, and because Sir Julian had decided on Mr. Keppel. To keep Clara near, married respectably, and under the hand of a man he believed manageable. Yes. Poirot lifted the torn note fragment from the table. You wrote to Sir Julian before dinner. Beatrice did not deny it. I wrote that I would not let Clara be sold as I had been. I meant to frighten him, nothing more. I signed Beatrice because Rose was a ghost and Beatrice could still speak to him as a servant. He came to the blue room. We argued. He laughed at me. Then Mercer's bell for dinner rang, and he said we would resume later. Did he take the note? Yes. He put it in his pocket. Did you later send a message calling him back? She looked up quickly. No. Poirot believed her. Who else knew Clara's true parentage? Lady Eleanor. Myself. Sir Julian. No one else for certain. For certain. Lady Helena suspected there was some ugliness beneath the marriage talk. She does not miss much. Daniel knew Sir Julian had no right to choose Clara's life, so absolutely, but I do not think he guessed why. Mr. Keppel, she paused. Yes. He knew there was money and a secret. He did not care much which came first. Before dawn, Poirot sent Graves 2 telegrams, one to Brighton, another to a retired nurse whose name Beatrice provided after long resistance. By noon, the answers began to return. There was no recorded death certificate in Brighton for Rose March in the relevant month. There was, however, a payment entry in a private nursing register for Mrs. Eleanor A., an infant female, discharged discreetly 6 days after birth. The retired nurse, now in Eastbourne, recalled, after prompting and with the imperfect loyalty of age, a frightened girl called Rose, a gracious lady with sorrowful eyes, and a child taken away under arrangements meant to prevent scandal. Graves, reading the telegrams, stared first at the paper and then at Poirot. So Miss Fenwick is Sir Julian's daughter. Yes, and he meant to marry her to Keppel. Poirot's face hardened. He meant to dispose of what he had already corrupted once in origin by corrupting it again in future. Graves swore very softly. The revelation altered the whole moral landscape of the case. A murder that had seemed rooted in greed now stood in the shadow of something darker. Possession, concealment, the long misuse of power. And Rose March is Mrs. Lorne, said Graves. Yes. Graves threatened. Then I have my murderer. No, said Poirot sharply. You have your grief. That is not yet the same thing. But the inspector, once given a line of action, did not easily relinquish it. By afternoon, he had brought Beatrice to the study and confronted her with the truth of her identity, the threatening note fragment, her presence in the blue room before dinner, and her motive to protect Clara from a monstrous future. She did not deny any of it. I would have stopped him if I could, she said. Did you stop him? No. Did you kill Sir Julian? Her eyes moved once to Clara, who had been summoned and now stood near the door, white as the wall behind her. No, said Beatrice. Graves almost believed her, which annoyed him. The greater storm broke when Clara learned the truth. Helena had wanted it delayed. Daniel wanted it told bluntly and done. Poirot chose honesty with mercy, which is more difficult than either. In the morning room, with rain beginning again against the glass, he told Clara that Rose March had not died, that Beatrice Lorne had once borne another name, and that Lady Eleanor had taken a child into the house under false parentage. Clara listened without interrupting him until he said quietly, "That child was you." Then she sat down very suddenly, as if the room had altered its balance. "No," she said at first, not passionately, but as one refusing an arithmetic error. "No, I cannot be." Beatrice made a broken movement toward her and stopped. Poirot placed the shawl in Clara's lap. She touched the faint stitched letters and stared at them as if they might yet rearrange themselves into safety. Sir Julian's daughter, Rose's daughter, Beatrice's child, Lady Eleanor's rescue. Everything she had believed about gratitude, dependence, charity, and place collapsed inward at once. "I am not his," she whispered. "No," said Beatrice, and for the first time in years the old name returned fully to her voice. "No, my darling, blood is not the whole of belonging." Clara looked up then, straight in her face, and something passed between them so private and so desolating that Poirot turned away. Daniel went out of the room and struck the library door hard enough to rattle the glass. Helena wept without sound, which was in her more shocking than tears. Graves, who had come to witness and perhaps to gather evidence, left abruptly with the expression of a man who has discovered that facts possess a moral smell. That evening, as the house struggled under its new knowledge, another development arrived. Mercer, searching the back of a locked escritoire in the library on Graves' orders, discovered Lady Eleanor's missing prayer book wrapped in brown paper and hidden behind a false panel. Inside, beneath the flyleaf, was a letter in Lady Eleanor's hand. The first line read, "If Clara ever learns the truth, let her know she was wanted from the first moment I saw her." The last line was unfinished. The page had been torn away, and on the brown paper wrapping was a fresh, unmistakable smear of Turkish tobacco. "Keppel," said Graves, triumphant. "Yes," said Poirot, "about the prayer book. About the murder as well." Poirot looked at him. "No, about the prayer book." Chapter 8. Inspector Graves arrested Adrian Keppel the next morning for obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and what he called, with visible satisfaction, a deplorable surplus of self-interest. Keppel bore the first accusation with indignation, the second with offense, and the third with silence. The evidence against him, as far as it went, was strong. Turkish ash in the East Passage, Turkish tobacco on the wrapping around the recovered prayer book, the attempted departure to London, his convenient interest in Clara's marriage settlement, his proximity to Sir Julian's legal affairs. Under pressure, and with Graves' patience worn paper thin, the man's smoothness finally split. "Yes," he said, "I took the prayer book." Clara, Daniel, Helena, Beatrice, and Poirot were present in the study when he said it. Rain struck the window in slow, cold intervals. The stopped clock had been removed, yet everyone seemed still to hear its false hour hanging over the room. "Why?" asked Graves. "Because I am not a fool." Keppel's voice had lost its polish and become merely bitter. "Sir Julian told me enough to understand there was some compromising history attached to Miss Fenwick. He would not state it plainly, but he implied that her dependence made her marriage to me especially prudent. When I began to suspect that the matter was not merely impropriety, but blood that could disgrace every arrangement he intended, I decided I had no wish to be destroyed by another man's secrets." "Yet you still intended to marry her," said Helena with contempt. He rounded on her. "I intended to survive. In your position, my lady, that may strike you as vulgar. It strikes me as exactly what you are. Graves rapped the desk. You stole the prayer book after the murder. Yes. You searched the blue room. Yes. You struck the constable. A pause. Yes. And the knife in the billiard room? Keppel's face twitched. I found it in the conservatory ash bin the morning after the murder. I recognized what it was. I thought if suspicion turned toward Vale, no one would look too closely at other arrangements. Clara made a sound like disgust, made audible. Keppel did not look at her. You planted it, said Graves. Yes. Then by God, man, why should I not believe you murdered Sir Julian too? Keppel's answer came fast, frightened, and true enough to disturb the room. Because when Sir Julian died, I lost the only witness who could have prevented me from being dragged into exactly this filth. I wanted his influence, not his corpse. Graves leaned back, dissatisfied by honesty because it had arrived inconveniently. You expect us to believe you merely improved the confusion after the fact. I expect nothing from you, but it is the truth. Poirot had watched the whole exchange with his eyes half closed. Now he opened them. Monsieur Keppel, when did you first suspect Clara's parentage? When Sir Julian hinted that certain relationships in the house required tact. He was drunker than usual and pleased with his own obscurity. Later, after the murder, I searched the blue room and found enough in Lady Eleanor's book to understand the rest. And the note summoning Sir Julian to the blue room? Keppel looked genuinely startled. I never saw it. Poirot believed that too. The false solution collapsed, though not without debris. Vale was released before noon, pale with fatigue and rage. Clara met him in the hall. Neither embraced the other. Houses like Ashcroft train people too well in restraint. But when Vale took her hand, Daniel turned his face to the window, and Helena left the room at once, because some tenderness is indecent only when witnessed. Graves was left again without a murderer. Let us count, he said in the study, pacing. Daniel had motive and no alibi. Vale had motive and a planted weapon. Keppel tampered with evidence and sought to benefit by marriage. Mrs. Lorne is the dead servant returned, with grievance enough for 3 lifetimes. Lady Helena lies when it suits her. Miss Fenwick knows less than everyone thinks, and more than she should. What remains? The butler. Always a dangerous omission to make the servants ornamental, said Poirot. Mercer, when questioned further, proved dull in the innocent way. Exact about meals, vague about souls, offended by speculation, but incapable of engineering it. What had remained was time. Poirot returned to Lady Eleanor's recovered letter. The missing final page troubled him more than the first. Why preserve affection and destroy conclusion, unless the conclusion named a danger still living? He asked Beatrice whether Eleanor had ever kept a diary. A journal of sorts, she said after hesitation. Not regular. She wrote when she could no longer contain herself otherwise. Where is it? I thought Sir Julian burned it after her death. Thought, said Poirot softly, is an unreliable undertaker. That afternoon he searched Lady Eleanor's old morning room, a chamber closed since her death except for occasional dusting. In a workbox lined with fading green silk, he found embroidery silks, a lorgnette, 2 unpaid dressmaker's bills, and beneath the tray, sewn into the lining, a narrow packet of diary leaves. The first pages were domestic, weary, full of small notations about weather, headaches, flowers, Clara's first words. Then the tone altered. Julian thinks himself capable of arranging every life he touches, she had written. There are moments when I believe he would set the stars to rights by force if they refused his design. Later, B says I must tell the truth one day. I know she's right, yet I am ashamed that I have delayed, because the child has become the only thing in this house that is wholly innocent. And on the last leaf, dated 2 weeks before Eleanor's death. If anything happens to me before Clara is told, she must never be left in Julian's power alone. B will understand why. Matthew Vale is still too young to be of any use, and Daniel is only a boy, though not, I think, a bad one. Helena. The sentence ended there. The remainder of the page had been torn away, not recently, but long ago. Helena. Poirot sat very still. Lady Helena Ashcroft had not yet entered the household when Eleanor died. Yet the name was there. When Poirot took the leaf to Graves, the inspector stared at it in open perplexity. That is impossible. Helena married Sir Julian 7 years after Lady Eleanor's death. So one has always been told. And you do not believe it? Poirot tapped the page gently. My friend, the dead woman appears to have a better memory than the marriage register. Graves looked up. What are you saying? I am saying there is yet another history in this house, and that Lady Helena may have entered Ashcroft long before she was invited to preside over it. That night Poirot asked Helena to meet him in the long gallery. Rain moved against the windows. The portraits watched. Lady Eleanor's face glimmered faintly in the dark varnish of the frame. Helena came in silver-gray silk with no jewels at all. You have found something, she said. Yes. Your Christian name in Lady Eleanor's diary. She did not start. She only became, if possible, more still. Then the house has finished pretending, she said. Who were you before you were Lady Helena Ashcroft? She looked toward Eleanor's portrait. At 19, she said quietly, I was Helena Vale. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Matthew Vale's sister. Chapter 9. The second great secret of Ashcroft Manor entered the case not with shock, but with a bleak inevitability, as though the house had at last yielded another stone from its own foundation. Helena stood in the gallery while the rain went on at the windows, and Lady Eleanor watched from her painted silence. My brother does not know the whole of it, she said. He was away at school when it began, and afterward I made certain he believed the kinder version. At 19, said Poirot, you were Helena Vale. Yes, my father was the Ashcroft estate steward, not grand enough to dine here, intimate enough to be useful. I came into the house occasionally to play the piano for Lady Eleanor when she was unwell. She was lonely. Sir Julian admired loneliness in others because it made them easier to manage. Poirot said nothing. I was young, Helena continued. Too young to know the difference between being chosen and being used. When I understood it, the damage was already done. Lady Eleanor discovered enough to send me away before scandal ripened. Money was provided. A marriage was arranged with a naval officer bound for India. He died within 2 years of fever. By then my father was dead, my brother still making himself into a doctor, and I had learned the utility of elegance. 7 years later, Sir Julian encountered me in London and decided to marry me. Whether from guilt, vanity, or appetite for old possessions, I never entirely knew. Perhaps all three. And Lady Eleanor knew of you. Yes. Helena's voice softened. She was kinder to me than I deserved, because she saw too clearly that I had been merely another item in her husband's long inventory of appetites. Did she know you were Matthew's sister? Yes. She pitied him for it. He does not enjoy being linked by blood to my mistakes. Poirot considered her. When you told me Sir Julian liked possession more than companionship, You spoke from experience. I always do. Did Sir Julian intend Clara for Keppel, because he had once arranged you likewise? Helena's mouth tightened. He intended her to remain within reach of his influence. Men like Keppel are useful to men like Sir Julian because they mistake complicity for advancement. Why did you not tell this earlier? Because I have lived too long by surviving disgrace through silence. One does not abandon a method merely because it has damaged one. Poirot inclined his head. No, but sometimes one must. When Graves heard Helena's history, he reacted as most practical men do when confronted by an emotional structure larger than their chosen case. He became angry. So Sir Julian made a habit of it, he said. Servants, stewards' daughters, dependents, any woman whose refusal could be weakened by circumstance. Yes, said Poirot, and now, perhaps, we approach character rather than incident. Vale took the news like a man to whom some half-understood pain has finally been given its true name. He found Helena in the conservatory among the damp geraniums and broken winter light. You should have told me, he said. She looked at him almost tenderly. When? At 12. So you might challenge a baronet with a Latin grammar? At 20, while you were trying to become a doctor on scholarship and stubbornness? Or later, when the shame had settled so thoroughly into me that I could not distinguish it from bone? Matthew Vale stood very still. Then he said, with the exhausted gentleness of blood that cannot afford grand scenes, You might have told me now. Helena's eyes closed briefly. Yes, she said, I might. In the midst of all this, Poirot found one small thing more useful than all the confessions. The recovered prayer book, now carefully examined leaf by leaf, held within its back lining a tiny pressed violet stem and a scrap of bill from a Brighton nursing home. Across the bill, in Eleanor's hand, 2 words had been written and scratched out so violently they were nearly illegible. Not Julian. Graves Whodunit. What does that mean? Poirot's finger rested on the page. Perhaps what it says, or perhaps what she feared it might not be allowed to say. That Clara was not Sir Julian's child after all. Poirot looked up. Now we think. The possibility changed everything again. If Clara were Rose's child, but not Sir Julian's, then Sir Julian's desire to control her was monstrous in one register and ordinary in another. If Eleanor had doubted or hidden paternity, then the motives of the women who protected Clara took on still subtler shades. Yet Beatrice, when confronted with the scratched words, insisted Sir Julian had believed the child his. Whether he was or not, I could never swear, she said. There had been another before him, a footman I once thought I might marry. But by the time I knew I carried the child, Sir Julian had already laid claim to the disgrace. Men do like to own what harms women. Poirot sat back. Graves spread his hands. Then we cannot even say whose blood Miss Fenwick carries. We can say whose power pursued her, said Poirot. That evening he gathered the family in the drawing room not for a final explanation, but for an experiment in conscience. Each of you, he said, has used silence as protection. I propose to make silence slightly less comfortable. Let's speak plainly. Sir Julian was summoned to the Blue Room by a note. In that room, he encountered evidence from the past. Lady Eleanor's belongings, perhaps Beatrice's threat, perhaps something more. From there he went, alive and angry, to the study. In the study, he was killed by someone he did not fear enough soon enough. After the murder, a second mind entered the affair and improved its confusion, planting the knife, stealing the prayer book, striking the constable. That second mind was Mr. Keppel, but the first The killing mind still sits among us." Nobody moved. Poirot continued, "The killer is not the most theatrical person in this room, nor the most obviously aggrieved. It is someone who has spent years enduring rather than speaking. Someone whose feeling is disciplined nearly to invisibility." Clara turned slowly toward Beatrice. Daniel did the same. Helena looked down. Vale's face tightened. Graves said sharply, "Mrs. Lorne, stand up." Beatrice was already standing. Her hands were folded. Her face was pale, but there was in it a composure beyond either denial or surrender. "I did not kill him," she said. And at that exact moment Mercer entered from the hall with the Evening Post. Among the letters was one addressed in a woman's old-fashioned hand to Hercule Poirot. Inside was a single sheet. It read, "If Mrs. Lorne hangs for this, you will be hanging the wrong woman." There was no signature. Chapter 10. Poirot did not show the anonymous note to the household at once. He showed it first to Helena. She was in the conservatory, standing among damp leaves and dim winter roses, when he entered with the paper in his hand. The glass roof drummed softly under the renewed rain. "You wish to save Mrs. Lorne," he said. Helena looked at the note and then at him. "Did I?" "Yes." "Then I am kinder than I believed." "No," said Poirot, "only less willing to sacrifice the wrong woman for the right crime." For the first time since he had known her, a real unease moved across her face. "What makes you think the note came from me?" Poirot laid the sheet on the wicker table between them. "The hand is disguised, but the disguise is old-fashioned rather than illiterate. The paper comes from Lady Eleanor's writing case, not from the current household stock. It carries the faintest trace of lavender. And, perhaps most important, it contains the word hangs. Most people now would write swings, is arrested, is punished. Hangs belongs to an older imagination, one trained by scandal, by melodrama, by survival through style." Helena's mouth quivered into something not quite a smile. "That is scarcely evidence." "No, but it is character, and there is more." He drew out another sheet, the fragment of the note that had summoned Sir Julian from dinner. "The paper is the same. So is the faint wax roughness on the fold. Sir Julian was called to the Blue Room by someone who knew Mrs. Lorne had confronted him there before dinner, someone who wished him alarmed, and someone who knew exactly which old nerve to touch. She knows." Helena turned away to the rain-dark glass. "Yet the killer did not strike him in the Blue Room," Poirot went on. "There the killer lost the advantage. Something happened. He refused, perhaps, or laughed, or began to move toward the study where his papers and authority lay. So he was followed. In the study there was a second confrontation, shorter and more final. Afterward the window was opened. The clock stopped with candle wax, and the room arranged to imply intrusion or melodrama. That demanded composure. Not Daniel's hot temper, not Clara's shock, not Beatrice's grief. Composure, madam. Helena's reflection in the glass seemed for a moment to belong to another woman entirely, younger, frightened, less perfectly assembled. "Inspector Graves," she said, "will require more than perfume and temperament." "Yes," said Poirot. "So I found him more." From his pocket he took a small, narrow object wrapped in linen. He unfolded it. It was a steel bodkin, slender as a stiletto-like needle, with a chased silver handle darkened by age. A weapon small enough to disappear in a sleeve, long enough to kill if driven by a steady hand. Helena stared at it. "Where?" she said. "In your workbox, under the false bottom where you believed only the dead had looked before. It was very carefully cleaned, but not perfectly. There remained, where silver meets steel, a little blood. She did not move. And also, said Poirot softly, a thread of gray silk caught under the chased handle. The silk matches the gown you wore that evening. When she spoke again, her voice had gone flat with exhaustion. You searched my room. No, Mrs. Lorne did, on my request, while you were with your brother. She has spent years putting this house in order. It was perhaps fitting that she should find the one disorder that mattered. Helena shut her eyes. That was unkind of you, she said. No, said Poirot. It was merciful. Had Graves found it first, he would have had no sense of proportion at all. For a long moment, neither spoke. Water moved in threads down the glass. Somewhere beyond the conservatory a door closed, and the house received the sound the way old houses receive everything, by making it part of themselves. At last Helena said, If I confess, Clara will know. She already knows everything essential. No, she knows what was done to her mother. She does not know what fury there is in me still. Poirot's face altered. My dear lady, fury in defense of innocence is not always shameful, but concealment of truth often becomes so. Helena opened her eyes. You will gather them tonight? Yes. Very well. When the family assembled in the blue room after dinner, the atmosphere was unlike any of the earlier gatherings. The room itself seemed to insist upon a different order of truth. Lady Eleanor's portrait had been rehung properly. The dust sheets were removed from 2 chairs and the small writing table. Candles burned in the wall sconces, restoring the faded paper to its old, uncertain blue. Rain muttered at the window. The silver handbell stood again at the center table, mute now, stripped of theatricality. Clara sat near the fire, one hand in veils, though only for a moment before she withdrew it. Daniel stood by the mantel, restless and pale. Beatrice remained upright beside the door, composed in the manner of one who has gone beyond hoping for justice and now desires only accuracy. Graves took his place with notebook ready, braced for arrest and not yet knowing in which direction it would move. Helena entered last. She wore black again, but without pearls, without scent, without any of the small armors by which elegance had long kept people at a distance. Poirot remained standing. In this room, he said, 3 women have suffered from one man's idea of ownership. Lady Eleanor, who is dead. Mrs. Lorne, who lost her name. Lady Helena, who lost her youth. And there is also Mademoiselle Clara, for whom the future was being prepared in the same image of control. Clara looked up slowly. We have already uncovered much, Poirot continued. Mrs. Lorne is Rose March and Clara's mother. Mr. Keppel, though not the murderer, planted the knife and stole the prayer book after the crime. Lady Helena was once Helena Vale, sister of Dr. Vale, and another victim of Sir Julian's misuse of power. But the question remains, who killed Sir Julian Ashcroft? He turned slightly toward Beatrice. Inspector Graves believed, for a time, that the answer was Mrs. Lorne. The heart protested, and quite reasonably. She had motive beyond the common measure. She confronted Sir Julian in this room before dinner. She wrote to him that she would not let Clara be sold as she herself had once been. But Mrs. Lorne did not summon him from the dining room. She did not plant the note. She did not stage the study. And she did not strike. Beatrice did not lower her eyes, yet something in her face eased. Poirot moved his gaze to Daniel. Mr. Daniel Ashcroft had debts and rage, but not the temperament for this deception. Dr. Vale had motive and opportunity enough to satisfy the police, but the weapon attributed to him was placed after the murder by another hand. Mr. Keppel improved the confusion out of self-interest, which is a lesser crime only in novels. We are left, therefore, with a person who knew the older scandal, who recognized the danger threatening Clara, and who had both the intelligence and the emotional discipline to turn confrontation into a killing. He looked at Helena, Lady Helena Ashcroft. No one cried out. The silence was too complete for that. Clara's face blanched, but she did not seem surprised so much as stricken by recognition. Daniel whispered, "God help us," under his breath. Grace half rose. Vale stared at his sister as if he had been prepared for pain, but not for its exact shape. Helena remained perfectly still. Poirot went on. Before dinner, Lady Helena saw Mrs. Lorne leaving this room and understood that some buried conflict had risen again. She knew enough already to fear the direction in which Sir Julian's will for Clara had begun to move. She wrote the note that came to him at table. "Come at once to the Blue Room. She knows. Sir Julian came here and found not the woman he expected, but Lady Helena." Helena spoke for the first time. "I meant only to stop him." Her voice was quiet, but every syllable carried. Poirot inclined his head. "Yes, that is true." Here, in the Blue Room, she confronted him about Clara and about Keppel. She had by then seen enough of Lady Eleanor's hidden papers to suspect the truth of Clara's birth, or at least the ugliness of what Sir Julian meant to do. Sir Julian laughed. Such men always laugh first when their power is challenged by a woman. Then he said something that changed intention into certainty. Helena's hands tightened once at her sides. He said, she replied herself, that Clara would marry where he chose. He said women wept, protested, adjusted, and were grateful later if they had any sense. He said I was proof of that. A small sound escaped Clara, half horror, half pity. Poirot's voice softened. Sir Julian then went to the study, perhaps to fetch the codicil, perhaps to ring for Mercer, perhaps merely because habit drew him always back to the room where authority sat most comfortably around him. Lady Helena followed. In the study, he turned his back on her for one moment, perhaps to reach for the paperweight, perhaps for the decanter, perhaps to demonstrate how little he feared her. She took up the bodkin from Lady Eleanor's old sewing case, which she had concealed in her sleeve after meeting him here, and struck upward beneath the ribs. Graves made a movement. "You have proof." Poirot produced the wrapped bodkin and held it where all could see. This was found hidden in Lady Helena's workbox. Cleaned, but not perfectly. There was blood at the join and silk from her gown. Graves took it with a low exclamation. Poirot continued. Afterward, Lady Helena staged the room. She opened the French window to suggest an intruder, forgetting in haste that Sir Julian's shoes remained dry. She stopped the clock with candle wax at 17 minutes past 9 to create a false time of death. In the struggle, Sir Julian had caught at her sleeve or wrist, and lavender from her clothing or handkerchief transferred to his cuff. Later she tried, by silence and by an anonymous warning, to prevent Mrs. Lorne from bearing blame. Beatrice stepped forward suddenly. Then it was for Clara. All of it. Helena turned toward her, and the composure at last broke. "It was because I saw him beginning again," she said. "Not only with Clara, with memory itself, with permission, with that same certainty that every woman's life in this house could be negotiated, placed, corrected." He spoke of her future as if she were linen to be put into a suitable drawer. And for one moment I was 19 again, and hearing him tell me that gratitude would make everything respectable in time. Vale covered his face with one hand. Daniel looked at the floor. Clara had risen without seeming to know she had done so. Helena's voice shook now, though it did not rise. "I never meant to become a murderess. I meant to frighten him. I meant to make him see." But he smiled. He smiled exactly as he had smiled years before, when he knew that shame was doing his work for him. And I understood that if I left that room, Clara's life would go on belonging to his design even after his death. So I killed him. No one spoke. Then Clara said, very low, "Why did you not tell me?" Helena looked at her with unbearable weariness. "Because you had already inherited too much from him without receiving his blood. I would not leave you my crime as well." Clara's eyes filled, though the tears did not fall. "It was never his blood that frightened me," she said. "Only his shadow." The sentence seemed to move through the room like a change in weather. Graves stepped forward, duty restoring him, because duty is often easiest where pity is hardest. "Lady Helena Ashcroft," he said formally, "I must ask whether you wish to make a statement." Helena drew herself upright. "Yes, I killed Sir Julian Ashcroft." She looked not at Graves, but at Clara. "I am sorry for what I have done to your life. I'm not sorry that he is dead." Chapter 11. After the confession, the manner changed, though not at once, and not into anything one would dare call peaceful. Helena was taken before dawn. She refused a solicitor until breakfast, accepted her arrest with a calm that made Graves uncomfortable, and asked only for one private minute with her brother. What passed between them no one heard. When Matthew Vale came back from that interview, his face looked years older and infinitely kinder. Beatrice did not sleep. She sat in the blue room until morning with Lady Eleanor's recovered letter on her lap, and Clara beside her, not touching it first. Near dawn, Clara put her head against Beatrice's shoulder in the hesitant, astonished way of a child attempting tenderness through adult grief. Beatrice's hand rose and rested on her hair. That was all. It was enough. Poirot walked alone before breakfast in the south garden. The rain had ceased. Ashcroft Manor stood under a cold white sky, every window pale, every stone exposed. In the potting shed the old pram still rusted where it had been left. In the yew-walk water dripped with maddening regularity. Somewhere a thrush had begun to sing as if morning had no obligations to tragedy. Daniel found him there. "She has confessed," he said. "Yes." Daniel thrust his hands into his pockets and stared at the house. "I spent half my life wishing that man dead. Now that he is, all I feel is that he managed one last ruin before leaving." Poirot glanced at him. "You feel also relief. Do not be ashamed of it. Relief and sorrow are often neighbors." Daniel laughed once, harshly. "And what becomes of Ashcroft now?" "That, monsieur, depends upon whether you intend to inherit only the property or also the habits." Daniel was silent. Then he said, "I used to think becoming master here would prove something. Now it seems only a risk. Then perhaps you are already wiser than the last master." Later that day, Keppel was removed under guard to answer for evidence tampering and related offenses. He departed the house with injured dignity and one broken cufflink, as if morality itself had handled him too roughly. Mercer watched him go, with disapproval so pure that even Poirot nearly smiled. The legal questions multiplied. Helena's confession, Keppel's interference, the uncertain paternity of Clara, the ensigned codicil, the old concealment surrounding Rose March. All of it promised months of courts, solicitors, and newspapers if the wrong appetite for sensation awoke. Yet some matters clarified at once. Sir Julian had died intestate in practical effect as to the new changes. Daniel remained heir under the earlier settlement. Clara's position became at once uncertain in law and newly secure in human terms. Daniel insisted before witnesses that she would remain provided for under any arrangement he controlled. Clara answered that she had no wish ever again to be provided for, as though she were a problem in upholstery. It was the first time Poirot had heard Helena laugh in memory rather than irony. Matthew Vale, after a day and a night in which duty had warred with love, asked Clara whether she still wished to leave Ashcroft with him when all formalities permitted. She answered yes, but not because I need rescue. No, he said, because you deserve a life. That too. Beatrice sat with them when this was said. She looked from one to the other and then out through the window into the rain-washed garden. I do not know how to be your mother all at once, she told Clara quietly. Clara took her hand. Then do not try all at once. It was not reconciliation. Reconciliation is a vulgar word for work that takes years. It was something better suited to reality, the first honest inch. Poirot remained 2 more days at the manor because truth, once uncovered, never leaves a house tidy. He helped Graves sort chronology from confession, appearance from fact, and those delicate details which courts demand but hearts rarely survive. Helena's statement was exact. She had indeed written the dinner note on paper taken from Lady Eleanor's and used stationery, knowing the old association of the Blue Room would unnerve Sir Julian. In the room, she had confronted him with the proposed arrangement for Clara and with what she had pieced together of Rose, Eleanor, and the child. Sir Julian had dismissed her, mocked her, and gone to the study to fetch the ensigned codicil as proof of his intention. There, when he repeated that Clara would obey as other women had obeyed, Helena struck. She had opened the window because the night itself seemed to demand some colder witness. She had stopped the clock because she wanted time, for once, to accuse him instead of his victims. Then, almost at once, she had understood the stupidity of theater and the permanence of blood. The rest had been improvisation and silence. Why the anonymous note to me later? Poirot asked her when they spoke once more before she was taken to Lewis. Because when they began to look at Beatrice, I knew what would happen, Helena said. She would not defend herself properly if doing so hurt Clara. And I had already used too many women as shields in my life, first by silence, then by marriage, then by manner. I could not endure one more. Why not sign your name? She gave him a tired smile. Because courage rarely arrives all at once, Monsieur Poirot. Mine came in pieces. On the final evening of his stay, Poirot found Clara in the long gallery beneath Lady Eleanor's portrait. The house was quieter than it had been since his arrival. Not healed. Old houses do not heal. They merely alter the use they make of silence, but quieter. You are leaving tomorrow, she said. Yes. Will it always feel as though my life belongs to several dead people at once? Poirot considered before answering. For a little while, yes. Then less. Then sometimes only when the weather conspires. But at last, if one is fortunate and brave, life begins to belong to the living person who bears it. She looked up at Lady Eleanor's picture. She wanted me. Yes, and my mother stayed near me all those years and said nothing. Yes, and Helena, she paused. I do not know how to feel about Helena. No, said Poirot, and you need not know at once. One must be fair even to confusion. She smiled through the remnants of tears. You make uncertainty sound respectable. It often is. At the door of the gallery, Daniel waited to take her down to dinner. He looked less like a man inheriting an estate than a man reluctantly inheriting responsibility, which is a healthier expression. Clara went with him. Poirot remained a moment longer. Below Lady Eleanor's portrait, someone had placed a small vase of violets. He did not ask who. The next morning the motor car came early. Mercer, grave as ever, supervised luggage. Graves had already gone ahead with his prisoner. Vale stood with Clara on the steps, Daniel behind them, Beatrice in the hall, where service and family now met uneasily but honestly for the first time in years. Poirot took his leave. As the car moved down the drive, he looked back once. Ashcroft Manor stood under pale sun after rain, every stone washed clean, yet still carrying the weather of what had happened within. Houses do not repent, but sometimes when truth has passed through them like hard light, they lose a little of their authority over the lives inside. And in one of the upper windows, where once a child had waited to be told who she was, no shadow stood any longer between the glass and the morning. The end.